the more adventurous you are, more curious you are, the more you experience, the greater opportunity you have to be lucky. And then obviously you have to capitalize on that luck. Good morning, my name is Giles and you're listening to Property Investory.
Fantastic. Well, Giles, it's a pleasure to have you on today. I'm really excited to share your story. Maybe firstly, just start off with sharing with the audience what you do. Tell us a little bit about your, I guess, what you currently, your some highlights of what you've been doing, and feel free to brag about it.
That doesn't come easy for me. So currently, I've focus on property and family life, which is I'm very fortunate to do so. And in my property business, I help others achieve wealth through property investments, and I have quite a clear strategy which has worked for myself, which I like to help and assist others to achieve similar success.
Excellent. So Giles, just tell me a little bit about what's your day-to-day like. Just explain to us, what are you currently doing in your business at this point in time?
Yeah, well, a typical day for me is pretty relaxed. I like to start the morning with a walk or a swim or a bit of yoga. I spend time with my kids and get them off to school, and probably do some household chores. I'm the most kind of responsible for running my house. My wife has a busy job, and once that's done, my day is typically involved with meeting prospective clients, potentially looking at properties or checking on to see how development projects are progressing, and also meeting with my referral network and the people who I get most of my business with, who I work together with in my virtual team.
That's great. It sounds like you've got a very relaxed kind of family life based around. Is that how you designed it initially when you first think, okay, I'm going to run my own business? I want to base everything around that kind of lifestyle?
Yeah, not really. It's probably not that strategically planned. I think it's just something which has changed as life has changed. I had children probably later in life than a lot of people, and I hadn't really planned what that would look like going forward. But I've been fortunate to be able to adapt the way I live to suit how I want to live and how I want to spend time with my family.
That's great. And can I ask, how old are your kids?
My kids were interesting. My son's birthday was this week. He's just turned 12, and my
birthday.
daughter's birthday is next week, and she turns 10.
Oh, that's nice. Oh, 2 years gap is a very nice age. I've got a boy and girl as well too, very similar in that, except they're not that age at this point in time, but 6 and 4 for me. And
Yeah,
it's just nice to see them, nice playing together and, going to school and growing up all together. So
yeah, it's really exciting. I feel very fortunate because I used to work back in the UK. I used to work with a lot of people who the dads just seemed to work, and they probably just didn't have the opportunity to build the same sort of relationships with their children as I've been able to do so. So it's been great.
That's excellent. All right. Well, Giles, I'm really, really excited to learn a little bit more about your history. So let's just jump back and get to know you personally. Let's firstly start off. Tell us a little about where you grew up first.
Yeah, I'm from the UK, or from England, as most people can probably tell from my accent. I grew up in a small village in the Midlands, so in the middle part of England, and it was a little village in the country. And I went to my junior school or primary school locally to where I was, and it was a tiny little school, like one of those little character Peppa Pig sort of schools. And there was 53. I remember there was 53 children in the school in total, and that included like the kindy and up to the age my son is now, up to high school. And I was in a year, and there was 11 children in my year, and I was the only boy.
That would have been quite interesting. So, did that change over time? I mean, like, it seems
shortly after I started at high school, my parents actually relocated us to another part of England, to Cornwall. So people who aren't familiar with England, if you look at the map of England, that's right down in that sort of left-hand bottom corner, that big toe. And we moved down to that area. But it was an interesting education, that little village school. I think for many years prior to almost about the time when my sister started to go to that school, it had been ran by a headmistress who had a little house next to the school. It was that it was that very, very classical in its approach with then, and the house and the school itself was just divided into 2 big classrooms. But that lady, she retired after probably 50 years, and she was quite a strict disciplinarian. And then we had a new teacher come in who was kind of funky. This would have been like, what was this, in the 60s, 70s. With a completely different approach to how children should learn. She was kind of a free spirit, and we very much were left to our own devices to do what we wanted to do, and that was and learn as we went. But unfortunately, I don't think we learned that much, and it became a bit of a challenge by the time we went to high school, and we were classed or streamed with children who had perhaps had a more stringent or structured primary school education. So I think it was a little bit of a challenge to catch up again after that.
Yeah. Was the move from your original town to Cornwall a big change for you as well too? Because as you said, it was a much smaller town.
Yeah, but it was interesting because we went from being in a little village to being in a much more remote place.
Oh.
And it was a big life change as far as, when we were in that village in the Midlands, it was, we were like most of the other families, but when we went to live in the middle of kind of nowhere in deepest, darkest Cornwall, we were very remote. And my parents bought an old house it was about an acre of land, so a fair chunk of land, and they basically took on a lifestyle of self-sufficiency. So they didn't go to work. We didn't have very much money. We didn't have holidays, but we were self-sufficient as far as growing our own vegetables and having goats and ducks and chickens to contend with. So
quite cool. I mean, like you think about that now, like everything's so modernized, everything's so industrialized. We get our food straight away just down the supermarket. But going back to the times when we actually had to farm for our own food, grow it, and so forth, makes you really appreciate, how long things do take. Because I'm even, at the moment growing some carrots and some tomatoes, back, and you're so used to just picking up off the shelf in the supermarket and it's there. But like you realize there's so many different seasons, the timing and so forth, and you learn to appreciate life a lot more. And that I think is something that we all miss, and we kind of go, oh, I really want that kind of freshness, organic kind of thing.
Yeah, it's funny. We have a little vegetable patch here at our house in Sydney, which is a lot of fun. I think it's great for the kids to see that. But there is a flip side. I think as a kid, we went to be into to such a remote state of living, and so and so lacking in interaction with other people. I don't think it was really the best way to grow up. And I think as you get a little bit older, you just want to be with other people, and you want to get out of that situation. So I probably left home as soon as I could after that to try and go and explore the big wide world.
Totally understand. So Giles, tell me a little bit about the reasons why your parents actually moved there. Because was it for any particular reason why your parents moved into those locations?
Yeah, they just wanted to. I mean, I think they'd grown up in Leicester, like post-war Leicester, and they just, for them, our village was obviously was 10 miles or 16 kilometers outside of the city of London, city of Leicester. But they just felt that there was a massive amount of change, and they didn't like what they saw going on. So they decided to escape the rat race, if you like, and it's a time of major growth of within the UK, and just seeking more space and a quieter, more humble existence.
Yeah, that's really, really interesting. Yes, a lot of times I hear that a lot of stories in the past that I've had guests on the show, they've always talked about, the reasons why they've moved, because I've had a number of guests, some guests have moved 6 times in 2 or 3 years with their parents because of, their work and jobs. This is a sort of a little bit different, I guess, perspective in life to be able to see why they've moved. So it's an interesting, fresh change. Are your parents still alive at this point in time?
But they're still alive. And interestingly, that property which they would have bought, maybe what would it be now, 45, 46 years ago when they bought that house, and it was a house which needed a lot of work doing on it, and they never went back to employed work. They just worked on their own land and on the renovation of that home, which is something which I started to learn or become somewhat curious about property construction from that stage, because I had to help my dad with the renovation and work on the house. And interestingly, they're still working on that house today. It's like a never-ending project.
Yeah, that's really fascinating.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit more then, during that childhood, I guess growing up, you went to, from primary school then to high school, as you mentioned, it was a big change for you. At what stage did you actually leave, the nest, I guess you can say, and start to explore the big world?
Yeah, so I when we went, it was a little bit unfortunate. So when we moved from Leicester to Cornwall, we moved at an age where I just missed out on doing what then was called the 11 plus. So they used to stream children, and if you were successful in the 11 plus test, then you would go to what might be a grammar school or more academically focused school. And if you were unsuccessful, then you went to a school which is perhaps more like, technical or vocational kind of courses. And I didn't take the test because in Leicester, where I was schooling at the time, they'd already abolished it. They moved to a new way of working, which was comprehensive education. But in the county of Cornwall, they were still operating in that older model. And because I got what was kind of the teachers at the school I've been at, I was there for one term, the secondary school in Leicester. They wrote me nice reports because they didn't really know me. I'd only been there a term. But consequently, people read that and thought I was a bright kid. They put me in the grammar school, which obviously was much to the delight of my parents and my grandmother and people who thought that was quite prestigious. But it probably wasn't the best place for me because academics were not my strength, and also because of that slightly disjointed primary school education I'd received, where you taught yourself. I just struggled. And it wasn't really, and I struggled throughout that school. I would have been better off in the more technical school. The only subjects which I excelled at were woodwork, metalwork, technical drawing, and ceramics. So I had a strong practical aptitude. In fact, I was very, very good at those subjects, but I struggled with my maths and physics and chemistry and Latin and the subjects which we had to do within the academic framework of the grammar school.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I guess the syllabus and the way we've learned has changed so much over the years. I mean, I remember doing those subjects when I went to school. It brings back a lot of bright memories. I'm very similar to what you said. I was strong in those areas, very weak at English and history and all that. But at the end of the day, I guess it builds character and gets you to where you are now.
Yeah, so. it's all part of life's tapestry, isn't it? So, but it was also, the other thing that was interesting was going to that grammar school was a boys' school, and it was it's super traditional in the way that it operated. A bit like, I don't know if you know, the famous story when we were kids was one called Tom Brown's School Days. It was kind of traditional, where everyone calls your teacher sir, and if you misbehave, you get caned by the headmaster. So very, very old-fashioned, very traditional in the way that it was managed.
Yeah. So after, I guess, finishing high school, where did that take you as well? Did you go straight into the workforce and start working, or did you pursue further studies?
Yeah, no, I pursued further studies, and foolishly, I still, because I still tried to follow a little bit of an academic bias because that's what everybody did. I just kind of followed the herd, and I went on to what was called like higher education, where you do, at the time it was called A levels. I did biology and chemistry, and you weren't allowed to be a part-time student. So I had to fill in the time, and that's when I started to do. So I did like ceramics and some more technical drawing type subjects, which I excelled at. At the end of that period of time, I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do, and perhaps a little bit unfortunately, my father, or the way that they worked, their view was to kind of do as little as possible, which is why they decided to get out of the work life and go and sit on a piece of land and grow their own vegetables in Cornwall. And we didn't, my parents didn't have any we didn't have any mentors or anyone else close to our family. We had no cousins, we had no friends, we didn't have anyone else to really give me much influence in life. So consequently, I kind of also grew up perhaps a little bit thinking that taking the easy option or doing as little. I think my dad told me to tell the careers guy that I wanted to get paid as much money as possible for doing as little as possible, which didn't go down particularly well with my careers teacher. And what I started to do is, when I was doing my A levels, I met a teacher there who was teaching the ceramics or pottery class, which was one of the ones I did to fill in my timetable. And he seemed to have a pretty cushy life. He was only a young guy, but he was enjoying what he was doing. He was teaching kids who were at school because they'd chosen to be at school, because they had moved into those years of school where you were there by choice. And he was finishing school at 4 o'clock every day and going for a surf, and he had like 12, 14 weeks holiday a year, and that seemed to have some appeal. So I left college and I went to do a 4-year degree to train to be a school teacher. So it's called a Bachelor of Education Honours degree. I did it in the city of Plymouth, which is also in the southwest part of England. And did that for 4 years.
Nice. So that appeal of, having a very cruisy life where you could just finish up at 4, go for a surf and stuff like that, were you able to still achieve that as a teacher?
Well, do you know what I did? What happened to me is, I don't know what it was. There were some early influences in my life because I didn't, and I don't know, it sounds a little bit sad, but because I didn't really have very much as a child, I kind of created this yearning for nice things. I just fell in love with beautiful cars or just nice things in life, or nice homes and just luxury things. I think just had some mass appeal to me. And what happened is when I was whilst I was doing my degree course, which was for 4 years, each of those years you went into a school and you'd teach for 3 or 4 weeks, or up in the final year, you'd spend a term in a secondary school teaching. And it was a really very powerful learning experience. There's just so many different things that you learn from that exercise. But one of the things I did identify was that the teachers who I respected the most, who were helping me learn, were typically teachers who had perhaps gone outside of the educational network, because there's teachers who go from school to college and back into school, and then there was teachers who went from school into industry and then back into school, and these guys just seem to have much more life skills and much more interest. And some of them said to me, go and do something, go travel the world or get some skills and then come back into teaching. It's not a bad thing to do. So that was part of the reason. Also, teachers historically were not particularly well paid, and they're still not, proportionally to the amount of training they do and the amount of the importance of the job which they fulfill. But at the end of my 4 years, I decided to go into work, and I went to try and earn some money. I joined a company which took on 8 trainee sales people. They only recruited graduates. You're on a graduate sales training program. It was really exciting because it was closer to London, which was a more exciting part of England than the southwest, where I'd obviously grown up and where I'd been studying. So I embarked on that career, and I just loved it. I loved the camaraderie of the team environment. I enjoyed visiting business owners and talking about how technology or telephone systems, new types of technology, could support their business. And I had a lot of success.
Wow.
Relative to my experience.
So
And
you went a completely different direction. You went training for becoming a teacher. You studied, further education, and then after that, you went into the workforce to become, I guess, a sales agent for, telecommunications or something along those lines. Does that sound about right?
yeah, that's exactly what happened. And it was an interesting time in telecommunications, because for many years, all telecommunications had been state owned. So it was called what they call like British Telecom, or before that it was the Post
Yes.
Office and British Telecom. And this was at the time, so this was in the mid 80s, when the market was liberalized and competition was introduced. It's interesting, a lot of people were using very old technologies, and all of a sudden there was new technologies being brought into the country. And then I was one of the salespeople running around small businesses, illustrating to them the benefits that they could achieve by updating their technology. It was a lot of fun.
That is a lot of fun. So what's some examples? I mean, our technology has changed so much. I remember the days when we had our physical phone, which we had to pick off the wall and dial, to nowadays we're just all mobile. Like, what were some of the technologies you brought into some of the businesses?
It was mainly in a business environment. Historically, they'd had like old-fashioned technology whereby it was a little telephone exchange located in the business, and there'd be someone there who was the switchboard operator, and they basically, if you called and you wanted to speak to the manager director, they'd be putting out a plug from the telephone line and connecting it to the cable which went to his office. It was that old. And then it became a little bit more sophisticated, where they'd be flicking switches to connect them, and then with this new technology allowed people to very quickly just transfer calls within a business environment. So it was kind of cool that there was just such a significant change from what had been it'd been in place for many years. All of a sudden, significant change. And this is really the start of the kind of dot-com boom as far as technology was concerned.
Yeah, that is phenomenally fascinating, because I mean, I remember watching in movies and stuff like that where they have the switch operators. The ladies usually just sit there just pulling plugs and plugging things in, and then obviously their role becomes kind of redundant after a while when we replace it with switches. The physical devices that just does it automatically. So they would have to be retrained to do something else, or they may become redundant and have to go and upskill in something else.
Yeah, I mean, it was at a growth time, so there was always, there was always other opportunities, and they still did. I mean, we still had a switch switchboard operator. It was just that they maybe had a headset and they could, had a keyboard as opposed to plugging things in and out.
True.
It was just like they couldn't believe it that you could, they could see if someone was on the phone or not just by looking at this device. Whereas before they'd have to call it and then, because they had no status of what someone's busyness was. And if they couldn't find the person or they weren't in the office, then they could just page into the warehouse or something saying, call here for Dick Jones, and he could go to any phone and pick it up. And people were like, wow, this is incredible. This is going to save our business so much time and improve our efficiency significantly. So it was kind of fun to do that. And the great thing about it was that it just seemed like I'd been a student for 4 years, and I used to get £2,000 a year as a government grant because my parents didn't work. That was like the maximum grant you could get, and that's what I'd live on. And I remember it wasn't all that long after that, I'd had some success in selling. I'm getting $2,000 in a month in a paycheck, and it just seemed like it was all the money in the world. And I treated myself to a couple of things, some of which I still have today, just celebrating that success. But other than that, I was a saver. I just had never had access to any money to spend, and that's probably what started me on
that
thinking
journey
about buying a property.
Wow. So let's jump into it. How long were you, I guess, before you actually started on your property journey? Did you stay in sales for much longer, or did you switch over into a different career?
Yeah, no, I really enjoyed the time that I had in sales, and I kind of progressed to more complex sales or more senior roles. And to ultimately, I was running. When I came to Australia, I was running a team of 120 salespeople across Australia. So I moved into sales management, and I worked in telecommunications / IT sales for 25 years.
Wow, that's a phenomenal career. You've been in there for quite a while. So
Yeah.
let's share a little bit about, I guess, then your inspirations, because this is really interesting. You mentioned, you touched into property. Let's start at that first property when you first purchased it, and at what stage in your life did you decide to purchase that first property?
Yeah, it is an interesting story because I didn't have any real influence. So my parents were not focused on any type of investment at all. And I'm not sure what it was. I think the first time that something kind of, I know you asked about aha moment, maybe something sort of struck within me was in my second year when I was at college. So I was in Plymouth, and we went into rented accommodation to study, and I moved into a house. And it was an old terrace house in Plymouth, which would have been 3-story, but it had been converted into a 4-story by utilizing the loft space. And there was 10 students in this place. Some were sharing rooms, and and there was a couple who had their own room. I was fortunate to have my own room. I don't know how I managed that. And they'd put in like a couple of different kitchens with like just a little bit of a little space around those like communal areas. The reason we used to call this building Crackles was because the guy who owned it, and he was a relatively young guy, but he used to wear these kind of these trousers which had a material which was called a crimpoline, and you could hear him as he walked around the house. And he'd only just bought this house, and he'd converted it into student accommodation. And I got on with it. I was always curious, and I always just talked to people, and I was interested that he was a young guy. He had a nice car, and that was probably what attracted me to him as well, just out of interest. And he was just explaining that he had bought this house, and he'd just bought a second house, and he was doing the same thing. So he was buying houses, letting them to students, which gave him guaranteed rent. In fact, the rent that I paid went directly to him. So his rental income was guaranteed, and he just kind of explained to me that we, the students, were buying him these properties.
Whoa. Wow.
Because basically at that time, and in my early investing in the UK, basically slightly different to it has been, or historically has been in Australia since I've been here, was that the rent you could collect would exceed the cost of the loan to hold that property.
So that was quite common over in the UK.
Yeah, it was very easy to do that. Just the ratio between the rent collected and the cost of the property made it much more favourable. And that just kind of struck a chord with me that this guy was doing that. Fast forward, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 years. Obviously, I completed my course. I did this sales job as a trainee sales guy. We started to have some success. Me and the other, maybe half of those graduates who came on board also, kicked some goals and got some good results. And then people started to look to buy property, And it was a little bit, yeah, back in that day, I mean, this is in the mid 80s, there's still very much a mindset or a blueprint that, yeah, you go to work, you go to school, you go to work, you get a job, you buy a car, you buy a house, or get married, have kids.
Yeah.
It was, this is much more flexible. People have a much more open perspective on the opportunities today, but it's still very much like that. So it was just a natural progression for those people once they got a little bit of savings behind them.
Yep.
Yeah, their parents or whoever was influencing them would be saying, yeah, you've got some money, don't waste it on a car,
Yeah.
a depreciating asset, go and buy yourself but get some bricks and mortar. So like the other guys I work with, most of the people went out and they bought like 1-bedroom apartments or whatever they could afford, new developments, nice properties for themselves. And I just, at that time, I think this is what resonates with the guy from Plymouth, is I decided I'd go and buy a house. So I bought a 4-bedroom house as opposed to a 1-bedroom apartment, and I rented the other 3 bedrooms out to guys I work with.
Very smart.
And we had a lot of fun living in that house, and I was living there for nothing, basically because the rent that I was collecting was covering my mortgage. And I guess that's probably how I started it. I got to a couple of years down the track, or maybe not that long. I got a little bit tired of the sharing, and I went and rented myself a 1-bedroom flat, just not far away, just around the corner.
Yeah, and you kept that property since then?
Yeah, I kept it for about, I don't know when I bought it in 1990. I kept it for 13 years, and then I sold it, and fortunately it had more than doubled in value in that time.
Yeah.
And when I bought it, it did feel like a bit of a gutsy move. It was like £92,000 at the time, and that's it's like probably 3 times the value of my parents' house. Or it was a lot of money, but it was the right thing to do.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it sounded like it was a great start to your property journey to be able to find a property like that, rent it out to your mates, and live there almost next to nothing. It makes absolute sense. And you guys have a time of your life as well too.
Yeah, we even have, I tell you, there's a little funny thing, which is back in the day, which was quite funny. I actually had a phone system installed in there because I was in the phone system business. I had a phone system which I know had come back from some deal somewhere, and I got one of the technicians to install it at the weekend. So this house had like 10 different telephones in it, so everyone had a phone in their room. We could call between each other, and it even used to print out a bill because it was a system which had been designed to go into a hotel, so everyone could use the phone. Everyone got their own fair slice of the bill. And we had a lot of fun making calls from room to room.
That is so cool. It sounds like, the best place to geek out would be around your phones. Loved it. So at what stage did you come to Sydney? Because, you're originally from UK, you've got a property there. When did you arrive in Sydney, and how did that change?
Yeah, I came out here in 2000. So nearly 20 years now. I've been working in telecommunications, and I'd moved to work for a global company which was based in the City of London, which was again, it was a lot of fun. Unfortunately, it was well paid, so I was able to invest in other property in the UK. So I bought a couple of units in London, which I could, again, it's almost like as soon as you saved up enough money for a deposit, you could buy another property, let it out, and it was just pretty much cash flow neutral. And and fortunately, I say, and it probably wasn't as, I don't remember it being particularly strategically done. I just happened to be buying in, and I often encourage investors not to do this. I was buying close to where I lived because I was lazy and it was easy. But that also taught me the lessons of how important that area is, and buying in areas which are in high demand, and a scarcity of supply is always going to drive the prices up more readily than in other areas.
Yeah.
So I actually came to Australia in 2000. I started dating an Australian girl in London, and she was due to come back. And the industry which I worked in changed massively. I worked for a company for 5 years before that, which used to be called WorldCom. It's called Verizon now. It's the world's largest telecommunications company.
Yes, we know that.
And I started working for them in London. There was 75 people in the business, and then 5 years later there was like 3,000 or 4,000 people. Culturally, massive change, and it didn't suit me so much. I quite like to be innovative and creative in the way which I operated as a sales guy, and I didn't care for the structure and the rules and regulations as much as when it was a smaller business. So it just seemed like a good time to have a change of scenery, and it was an easy option for me, not having traveled extensively, on my own, to come back with this girl to Australia and check it out. So we arrived in, I think it was like March in 2000 or 2001. I think 2001. And yeah, I just fell in love with this place as soon as I got here.
And you haven't looked back since, which is fantastic.
Haven't looked back.
Okay, well, I'd love to just delve into a little bit more of your journey, because you've purchased a few properties in England. You've obviously done a portfolio here. Actually, just out of curiosity, and if you wouldn't mind sharing, like, how many properties have you purchased in your own portfolio since then?
Yeah, it's a good question. I did this for someone else the other day. So I've probably bought about 12, 13, about 13 properties for myself in my own journey.
Yeah.
And it's more about the lessons that's learned, because I don't hold many of them. I've sold them, and one of the things which would have been great would have been to hold some of these.
Yeah.
But the reality is, it's quite often you do really need to release the capital, because as you and your listeners will know, it comes down to serviceability, and sometimes you just need to access that capital. So there's a couple of them which would have been really nice to still own, but they were kind of all part of where it's led me to today. Also, I bought properties on a number of occasions because, from a lifestyle perspective, and they didn't perform as well as investments, and obviously that wasn't the primary purpose. But had I known what I know today, I would have been much more strategic in my property acquisitions, because you can actually achieve the best of both worlds in many circumstances. Whereas when I was buying for a home, I was buying purely with my heart and with no real consideration for the investment potential of that home.
And that's quite common. I mean, at the end of the day, sometimes along the journey, you've got to enjoy the successes and the wins. And if you're buying something for yourself, you can get a little bit more out of it. And I guess the reason why I asked you about those properties, as you said, you bought and sold at least 13 properties, you would have experienced quite a lot of ins and outs and ups and downs. And what I like to probably want to find out from you at this point in time, Giles, is maybe along those journeys, have you had any potentially worst investing moments along that journey?
Yeah, I have, and I think it's when I look at what I know today, it's so much, and it all just comes through from experience. And you say it's the good experiences, the bad experiences, and I just operated with no real strategy, with no real data or evidence to back what I was doing. I was just lucky sometimes and lucky at others, even lucky at others, but there really was nothing there. And that's one of the things which is, now I could see that I could have, I don't know, I feel I'm very successful, but financially I could have potentially been more productive if I'd followed a strategy in doing so.
It's interesting that you mentioned that. So I guess if you followed a strategy, yes, life would be a bit different and the portfolio would change and so forth. But I'm just wondering, like, the amount of properties, have you had any issues with any of them in regards to, tenants doing something, or maybe the property that you purchased just wasn't the right one? I mean, you kind of touched on that lifestyle.
Lots of properties. And I say it's just through that. That's the experience which you bring. When I help a client, it's all that experience that comes together. That first property which we talked about, the 4-bedroom house, which I had for 13 years. There was a period there where I had a tenant in there, and he stopped paying the rent.
Oh no, gosh.
Yeah, and he then he'd pay some dribs and drabs. He was having a tough time. I think it was probably self-managed, or the agency didn't do much about it really. It was difficult. The guy had been there a long time and he'd paid his rent. I spoke to him. I tried to see if we could come to some sort of arrangement.
Yeah.
And then finally, he moved out. And one of the neighbours fortunately let me know that had happened. But he left. His house was full of stuff.
I don't understand them. They must have been going through obviously a tough time.
Yeah, I don't know what happened. I think that maybe they were a big family. Obviously, it was a 4-bedroom house. I think maybe he went through a separation or something. Something. Obviously, tough times had happened. But they left. The house was absolutely full of rubbish and furniture and all sorts of stuff. I remember having to hire a skip and go around there and clear it all out.
Wow.
So that was
So
a bit of a challenge.
yeah, I can imagine. I guess, like when people leave those kind of things, what was this in the UK or was this in Sydney that happened?
Yeah, that
By
was
the
the
way?
UK. That was the first
Yeah.
house that I bought. That one
Okay.
in
Yeah.
Berkshire in England back in 1990.
Yeah.
So
So yeah, I mean, as you said, that was sort of towards the end of actually towards when you're selling. Is that when it kind of triggered to go, okay, might be time to sell this property?
yeah, it was pretty close to that. Once I was in, I was I knew I was once I was in. When did I sell it? I remember 2003. Yeah, so once it was probably may have been around the time that I was over. In fact, I think no, actually, I was already in Australia when he stopped paying the rent, so I had to go back to try and sort it out, and then I sold. Then I sold it.
Mm.
And again, yeah, it might not have been the right time. One thing again, it's only been more recent. I've really started to understand, the fluctuations in the market and how, when is a good time and when it's not a good time, and also how to really ensure that you get the best possible sale price for that asset. I just probably I gave it to a local agent. I didn't go, I didn't spend sufficient time really to understand what its market value was or who the best agent might have been. It was just that kind of knee-jerk reaction. Yeah, it
Yeah.
might have been better to renovate it and sell it, or to style it. There might have been some things that I could have done which would have further increased the return on that investment. But I was just glad to see the back of it.
Yeah, I can understand. Sometimes when stressful situations like that happen, you just want to close it and move it forward. But I guess in hindsight, you learn these things and it becomes
Yeah.
like, those moments and lessons in life. Would you consider that to be one of your aha moments, or do you have another aha moment in your life?
Oh yeah. Well, I had another experience with the property. So I've been in Australia for 20 years, but 9 years ago I was back in the UK for 9 months. My wife's Swedish, and we wanted to be closer to her family in Sweden, so we tried the UK. Fortunately, we were able to come back to Australia, which is great. But whilst I was there, I did a couple of. I wanted to get involved in doing a property project. Then that was at the time when I decided that property was my future. It was post my 25 years of IT telco sales. So I got to England. We rented a house there, and I looked for a project. I just wanted to get stuck into something. I've had 2 babies and a wife at home. I just wanted to, I just can't. I can't sit still. And it's interesting to actually, I bought a property, so I looked, and it's kind of interesting. I knew that I was better off to be closer to the centre of London because the property market is just so much stronger. And every month, this company, the one I used was Savills. They were an auction house, and they create a book, and they just you go to a massive auction, and they sell those properties. And I bought a property. It was a terrace house in Twickenham, which was in need of renovation, and I bought that at auction, and it was £400,000. And what happens is once you've bought it, you have a 20-day settlement period, so it all happens pretty quick. And within that period, I was able to get the keys and to go and check it out. I thought, well, I'll get around there, see if I can get a few local builders round, or get a few local estate agents round, so I can start to understand what to do to this house to make sure it suits the local demographic. And I met a real estate agent who came round. And he told me how well I'd done on my purchase, and I knew I bought it for less than I expected to pay. And he said he could sell it for more, and I was well. I said, well, at the end of the day, it's a money making exercise. You can, once I get my keys, it's going to take me a month to line up my builder and to get my drawings done for my loft conversion, whatever is required. Take it for that length of time. If you can sell it, then you have a go. That's up to you. And the great thing in the UK is the real estate agent covers your marketing fees. So I had nothing to lose. I was like, I'm going to be in there working out what we're going to do with it. If you think you can sell it, then give it your best shot. Doesn't matter to me. Anyway, after the day it settled, I gave him a set of keys, and within a week he'd sold it for £100,000 more than I bought it for.
Fantastic.
So, which was back then was probably about $160,000. And obviously I had to take that because it was such a phenomenal result.
Yeah.
It's the easiest money to ever be made. But on the flip side, I was a little bit disappointed because it had taken away this opportunity for me to get my hands dirty and get stuck into a project. So consequently, I went and bought another property not far away in the suburb of Barnes in southwest London. And this was another terrace house, but this terrace house had been divided into 2. So it had a ground floor apartment or unit, and then one on the first floor. and I bought the one on the first floor. And I knew that I could do a loft conversion to increase the size of it and modernize it. And I bought it, and I started to get the work done, and it was going to be beautiful. It was a lovely old house, and it was a great renovation. I got a good builder, and then it came time to sell that property, and it wouldn't sell. Well, it was just before I started to sell it before it had even been finished, just to see what level of interest there was. And what happened is that, and I fell foul of this, is that the property was on a lease. It's just a lease between the ground floor flat and the first floor flat, but it has a lease because it's a share of the freehold, which is the land that the property is built on. And I knew that, but I didn't think much about it. But what had happened is the lease, which was on there, only had like 25 years left to run. And in the UK, anyone who was looking to buy that, who was going to go to a bank to borrow money, or to a lender to borrow money to buy that, the lender wouldn't lend money, because if it's got less than 50 years left on the lease, they won't lend the money. Oh. See, and because I'd bought it cash, because I'd had all my money we sold up in Sydney when we went back there, so I had enough cash to buy it. I hadn't foreseen that problem, and I hadn't asked myself why it hadn't sold before. I just thought I'd got myself a good deal. So that would be easy enough to sort out. But unfortunately, the lady who lived on the lower level was a very difficult to deal with. But ultimately, we had to do a new lease, it becomes a 999-year lease, and then that property can be financed, or money can be borrowed against it to buy it. So that was
did that take long to get that? Because I mean, I don't even know. I've never heard of a 999-year lease before. I know it happens commercially, because I know that big buildings and stuff like that, they usually lease the land from commercials and big businesses and so forth. That's quite common. Yes. But I haven't heard of one just between.
Yeah, so I mean, it's a little bit like, I've got a development going on at the moment, and it's a little bit like this, a similar thing where you have two houses, and if they're on they've got a shared driveway, and it's on a strata. It's the same sort of principle as that, because you've got something which potentially the condition of one can impact the other, or the value of the other, or there's areas which are shared, like this house. Obviously, they sit on the same piece of land, and they also have like a shared front door and hallway. So it's just a case of managing that, for any future incident or issue that might appear. But that was a big learning curve.
How long did that process take to get that lease set up, and then finally, to be able to get refinancing?
Well, it probably took about 3 months to get that problem resolved. But the lady downstairs was quite a shrewd operator, and she would only re-enter into a new lease if she got an extra piece of land from the yard. So it was a big learning curve on that property. That's probably one of my worst investing moments, because what also compounded the problem with that property was then it was sold in a declining market, which was unfortunate. And then I was back in Australia then, and the solicitor who dealt with the sale, he took the money. I gave him some details. He was meant to put it into like a holding account, like an international holding account, but he didn't. He paid it into the account, and he converted it into Australian dollars, which wasn't what he was supposed to do, because the exchange rate was very volatile at the time, and had major problems. And then the bank reversed the transaction, but it had devalued then, and then it was sat in a holding pattern. And I had to wait and decide, and it was probably one of the most stressful moments in my life, because every day he was losing or making money, and I lost a fair bit. But then I was just glad to be done with. But
gosh,
it's just two completely different experience. One was like the easiest one in this 9 months. One was just the easiest opportunity, and the second was like the most challenging opportunity. So
yeah, I love those stories. That's phenomenal to hear that. I mean, like, good and bad as well too. But at the same time, what's really interesting is that I'm just trying to understand. You went back to the UK, as you said, just for a short period. How long were you there for, and then you came back to Australia?
Yeah, I was there for about 9 months, and then I was back, and that's when this sale was going through. So I was stuck over here. You've got the time zone challenge. You're dealing with banks who you don't feel they really care, and everything you own is tied up in this transaction.
Yeah, that is a bit of a nightmare by the sounds of it. What was the reason for going back to the UK for that short period of time?
Yeah, well, so we sold up property here, and we went back, yeah, just with a view to maybe living closer to my wife's family in Sweden. I don't want to be in Sweden, because I don't speak Swedish, and it's colder than England. So that's why we went there, because it's obviously much closer in the same time zone.
And then eventually you both decided to come back to Australia and then settle back down in Australia for the rest of your life.
Yeah, we just came to. I think what happened, my wife had come out here in 2001. We met here, but her family were always expecting her to return, and then after our children were born, they were a close family, and it was difficult to have that distance between them. But now everyone's worked out the way it is, and that's accepted. And we, unfortunately, due to COVID, we've not gone this year, but we go back as regular as we possibly can.
That's totally understandable, and especially when the kids are very young, definitely having an extra few hands makes a difference.
For sure.
I could not imagine, growing up kids at that young age between 0 to 3, how hard it would be without support.
So it is a challenge.
It is a challenge, as every parent says as well. All right, well, that's really fascinating. And I guess wanting to sort of understand a little bit more, you talked about developments, and that's what you've been doing as well too. Let's just unpack a little bit about that. Just talk a little bit about your strategy firstly, and just explain where you're heading at the moment with the particular strategy that you've in place.
Yeah, so what's becoming apparent to me really was that the best ways to create wealthy property, or to create or build equity, is to buy properties in locations which are going to outperform the averages. So the location can do the heavy lifting, and the way I see it is you need to buy in an area where there's strong demand for people who want to live there, and also some scarcity of stock. So they're the two things. A lot of people look at the supply and demand, and they get a little bit starry-eyed by the demand side of things. And statistically, you can illustrate an area has got massive growth happening in that area, or forecasted growth is very strong. But if there's no limitation in the stock or supply of property there, then obviously that demand can be satisfied quite easily. So the important thing is to have demand, but also scarcity. And probably the third major factor there is that demand for property ideally needs to be from people who have access to capital, who have high disposable income, because they're the ones who can go, no, I'm having it, no, I'm having it, and that's what obviously ultimately drives the house prices up, or property prices up in a particular area. And that's where I could see that. That's where my first-hand experience of buying those properties in London, for example, they outperformed that 4-bedroom house, which was further out of London, and that's because it's a more dynamic location. And that's why now, for me and for my clients that I work with, my focus is really to be in the middle ring of Sydney and Melbourne, in areas where aspirational professional people want to live, and there's limited amount of stock, so they have to compete for that. And certainly also in areas where they can't carve up land for more subdivisions or build more homes, and they can't build high rise in those areas either. And that means that there's going to be consistent demand. So that's a cornerstone of my investment strategy, is buying in the right location that's going to outperform the averages and holding it for a long period of time. I say, unfortunately, I didn't hold all of my properties for a long period of time, but my strategy, whether it was a strategy, I just rolled one into another, and ultimately ended up where I am today. So that's the one part of it. The other part of it is that I've got a big focus on what I now call or refer to as manufacturing equity. So it's having an asset in that right location, but also by having an asset where we can increase the value of that asset by doing something to it. So it could be as simple as a renovation, but my focus is probably more on developing it. It could be buying typically my choice is to buy older houses on bigger blocks, and that gives the option to perhaps put another house on the back of the block, or perhaps knock it down and put 3 or 4 townhouses on it.
Smart strategy, and I think that's sort of the way that we're looking, especially with a market that I guess the price of properties, you got to keep adding value to it, because with the way the market has been moving at this point in time, I guess you got to ask yourself, is it remaining flat or is it moving up? And during the times that it's flat, and we know that Sydney, moved or stayed around about sort of flatlining for about 6 years, then we have that massive boom. During that time, what do? You can't wait and hold out. You got to manufacture equity some way or another, and that's always been, you know, a great strategy to be able to increase equity and get additional cash flow coming through as well too. Because once you've got that in place, you can actually just keep rolling that through into another property and, you know, leapfrogging to so forth.
Yeah, you're absolutely right on 2 points there. One obviously is, I explain this to people. So, what drives house price growth? It's market sentiment and people's access to capital. If people have got more money, then they'll spend more money on buying homes. But the two drivers, or what creates that access to capital, are interest rates, which are as low as they can go, which is what's driven that last boom, which you've talked about. Really, if people can access more money for the same salary, then they're going to spend more. And the other one is wages growth, and wages growth has been very slow in Australia for a long time. And when we come out of hopefully before too long, we come out of COVID, there isn't going to be a lot of wages growth as unemployment grows. Then wages growth is going to be non-existent or be minimal. So again, picking that location where the potential future buyers are people who are more likely to benefit from wages growth, again, is advantageous. It's going to support that growth. But what I say to people is, regardless, if we go in for a period of very little growth over the next 10 years, let's at least make sure you position your investment property in a location that when things get back to normal and there is more growth, then you're positioned to take advantage of it. But in the meantime, obviously, we've got that opportunity to manufacture equity. And as you alluded to then, what I like to do is, I'm quite simplistic, and I'm like, if in people's working years, I'm not the type of clients I work with. We're not particularly looking for rental income. We're looking to build an asset base for the future. So I'm not talking to people who perhaps want to give up their day job. It's about people who enjoy their day job and they recognise that, that funds their lifestyle. But whilst they're going to work, operating, behind them is, this investment strategy, which is going to give them an asset base for the future. So when they choose to transition to retirement, they've got options, whether they hold on to them, they sell them, transition them to higher yield investments. Doesn't really matter. What you want to do is just about building that asset base. Yeah. My focus there is not on quantity, I'm much more like on quality, and the quality of the asset, and obviously the proportion of equity you hold in it is the key.
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree with you. It's a balance of both, I guess, as well, too, especially talking about what you're planning to do. And everyone has different stages in life as well, too, that they want to achieve this and X, Y, and Z. What I'm also wondering, if you wouldn't mind sharing, you've talked a little bit about some of the developments you're doing. Are you able to share with us what the current development you're working off? And just curious, wanting to know a little bit more about what your plan is for something like that and how you're actually manufacturing equity.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. So my development things started from those properties which you talked about in the UK. So I'll just take a step back. So I worked for 25 years in IT telecommunications. And then when my children were born, when my son was born, I took time out of work, and I was tired of corporate by that point, and it was refreshing to have a step back. My wife is younger, and she was more excited and more ambitious about her career at that time. So it seemed like a great opportunity for her to go back to work following her maternity leave, and I'll become a stay-at-home kind of dad. Mm-hmm. And because I can't sit still and can't watch baby TV all day, I also started to do like cosmetic renovation.
Yes.
So my first house, we moved from Sydney. I moved to a property in Rose Bay, and whilst my kids were small, I would be renovating the property, and then I sold that property just prior to going back to the UK. I did a couple of the projects in the UK, and when we came back, I wanted to look for another property project. A lot of our friends and people, friends had talked about the Northern Beaches being a great place to live. So this is the Northern Beaches of Sydney. Prior to our trip back to Europe for 9 months, we'd been living in the eastern suburbs, which is a great part of Sydney. But I could see that what I heard from the Northern Beaches, that it was going to be a great place for kids. So when we returned, we rented a place in North Manly to see if we liked it, knowing that if it didn't work out, we could go back to what we knew. But as soon as we got here, it just felt like being on holiday. There's something about being close to the Northern Beaches, which has just really relaxed feel. Felt a bit like going to Queensland or something to me. Yeah. and we rented a place here, and I looked for a project, so I wanted something to do to get stuck into, and I bought a house in the suburb of North Calcal, which was an older house, almost like a weatherboard type of cottage, which I could see there was the opportunity to completely renovate. Had some quite solid bones for it for a property of that era, but there was opportunity to work on that. So we bought that house and we moved into it, and I did an extensive renovation on this property. And it's interesting because it's on 2 levels, and the lower level was like a little self-contained granny flat, and we spent, the 4 of us lived in there for 12 months, which you could never do with the kids the age they are now. But because the kids were little, they were like toddlers, it was all quite exciting and fun to have a bunk bed and a trundle, and everyone squeezed in this little room. And I did this house as a development, as an owner builder, so I worked on it, day in, day out. In fact, it was quite a challenge, because it was if I'd known what I knew now, I would never have started it. It was a little bit like one of those grand design shows where everything seems to go wrong, and very, very, very quickly, and you suffer like bad advice and bad trades and all those different things that go wrong. And when your family's living in one room, it puts a lot of pressure on you to try and get it
done,
get it done. And then we were able to move up into the new part of the house, and then I've renovated the lower part of the house. And the original idea was that then that would be sold, and I would move on to my next project. But we love living here, so
you kept it.
So that was great, but obviously that ties up a lot of capital. What happened then is I had a friend of mine who worked as a financial planning business, and at the time, and they'd asked me if what I was going to do next, and would I be interested in helping their clients with property investment, on selling properties, and just helping, assisting them with their investment property portfolios. And that's what led me into working in what I do today. I've digressed a little bit. So on my development project, so I don't have a big portfolio project. So most of my properties which I've purchased have all rolled into this one property which I'm sitting in now, which is a beautiful house.
Yep.
And probably 5 years ago or 6 years ago, I bought a property which is not that far away in the suburb of Colleroy, and I bought a 1,200 square meter block.
Yep.
Which had at the time a development application approval, but it was actually a deferred DA approval, which is again something which I was quite naive and didn't understand fully at the time, which means it's a DA subject to certain conditions.
Yeah.
But I bought it anyway, and 1,200 square meter block with an approval for 2 dwellings on it, and the house had an old house on it which had a tenant in it who's been there for many years, and it's been kept, and until this year it's been tenanted. And this really is a great illustration of the kind of strategy which I employ. Predominantly I buy in Melbourne because it's much lower cost of entry for my clients. Yeah. But that property has gone up in value probably 500,000 or 600,000 without doing anything. Yeah. And now obviously I have the opportunity to manufacture the equity. So we're currently under construction, and we're putting 2 dwellings onto that block. There'll be like 2 luxury homes valued at probably $2 million each.
Yeah. That's a very smart strategy.
Yeah. So and ultimately there'll be a $4 million worth of property. It'll have $2.5 million worth of debt and $1.5 million worth of equity.
Yeah,
and that's all done with borrowed money.
Yeah.
So the return on you're putting in 20% of the build costs, but predominantly it's done with borrowed money. So the return on capital is massive.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's the kind of model. And obviously, again, you touched on this a little bit before, and this is what I love about the Melbourne sites is we can buy a property for an investor, we can do the due diligence for development, and they can hold it for 4 or 5, as many years as they like. But at the point where we decide to turn it from one older house into 3 or 4 townhouses, there's just a massive equity gain. They can make $500,000 on that. They'll make money on it because of the growth, because it will perform as well as anywhere else, or better than anywhere else. It'll outperform the averages for capital growth, whether or not there is any. But post development, they've just got all those options, because then it goes to a strongly cash flow positive investment, but we know it's in an area which is going to be great and is always going to continue to grow. So the best thing obviously is to hold those properties, take advantage of the depreciation allowances and set yourself up for your retirement. But again, if you want to go again, you've got options. If you've got 3 or 4 on separate titles, maybe you want to sell 2 or sell 1 or keep all 4. Just gives you lots and lots of options.
Totally. Yeah, I love that strategy. It's very, it's simple to understand. And that's what I like about it. It's just a matter of having the patience, knowing where to buy, and then also executing it, as well.
Yeah,
So
I really do think that. It's been through 30 years of investing and learning, and it's great now because there's so much content available, which probably wasn't available when I started. But you put all that together, and there's so many different strategies, so many different things that people talk about. But when you boil it down, you can actually make it quite simple and straightforward. It doesn't have to be that complicated. People talk to me, oh, is it risky or is it not? And it doesn't have to be high risk if you stick to proven, tried and tested ways of investing. And stick to those fundamentals. It will work.
yeah, totally. That's great. All right. Well, Giles, I'd love to learn a little bit more about perhaps maybe some of the resources that you've come across your learning journey. You've kind of just touched on it. There's just so much out there. What have you or what could you recommend that you've used along your journey to help you achieve the success that you have now?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the access to the data you get, I mean, people refer to it as RP data. I think the subscription I have is Price Finder, but also obviously Real Estate Common and Domain. You've got access to so much information about your suburbs, street properties, and that for me is invaluable. So I do very detailed feasibilities of properties to buy, to develop for my clients, and it's having access to all that information, which is not my own. I can look at a house on the same street. I can see exactly how much it's sold for. I can see exactly how much the offspring sold for or is rented for. And I know my bill costs. I know my council fees. I know my consultancy fees, and I can use all that. But if I could only base that on my own experience, then it'd be very limited. But having access to that, every property, ones that I've looked at, which I haven't bought or have been unsuccessful, I just still trace them. I'm buying in the same suburbs, and that data just is invaluable to see that. So I think due diligence is key, and learning to. I mean, my thing is what I've tried to learn to know is learning to look at properties and really ask yourself why you shouldn't buy them. It's very easy to say, yeah, I want to buy something, and it's very easy to get that. This cognitive biases that just positive affirmations. It looks good. You start reading stuff and you start convincing yourself that something is great and this area is going to be brilliant. And you really have to do the completely opposite and try and convince yourself why you shouldn't why you shouldn't buy it. And that's where that data can provide a lot of information.
Yeah, to avoid a lemon at the end of the day, and that's the last thing we'd want, for anyone to buy. Yeah,
and so it's so easily done, and unfortunately, in Australia, it's just such an expensive mistake because of the stamp duty implications. And buying and selling costs. You just, I say this to people all the time. You've got to get it right, and that's when when people. It's great because the type of clients I deal with typically can see the value. But what you pay someone like me as a buyer's agent, it's just like the best money. It's the same. People will spend that money when they sell that property to a real estate agent. It'll have absolutely no impact on the success of that investment. They might have held it for 10 years, but the right advice at the outset, that's just the best money you can spend. It's the difference between $500,000 or $1 million in 10, 15 years.
Absolutely. And that's so important. All right. Well, Giles, let's take a step back. And if you were to go back in time and meet yourself, say 10 years ago, what do you think you would have said to him?
10 years doesn't seem a very long time ago for me. So my son's just turned 12. I think I'd tell myself to, just don't worry, Giles, you've got this, because the main things I've done in this period was obviously building this house and also going into business, and it's easy to get caught up or stressed or worried about things, but I'm sorted now, so I don't need to let the little things worry me. I guess the other two things I probably learned, or would have been nice to have told myself, is to follow your gut. because if your gut instinct is very, very powerful. And I've been in a business situation where I knew it wasn't. Part of me knew it wasn't right, but I continued to proceed with it, and also to supporting that as well. Just documenting things. I was involved in a business relationship which I didn't, failed to document, or I perhaps a little bit over trusting, a little bit over optimistic, and I sometimes neglect to focus on the detail. So that would be good advice to myself.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Okay. I really, admire that you shared that, because I think I can relate to some of those things, is making sure that there's documentation. I'm the same as well. So
Yeah,
I understand what you mean.
I'm a bit excitable sometimes. There's other thing that on that one that I think is really interesting. I wouldn't mind if I had the opportunity to talk to myself 30 years ago, which is probably would have made a bigger difference, would have been to seek the support of others. And I think, I go back to the way I was brought up. We didn't have any interaction with other people. My parents, they didn't, they never borrowed things from people, never helped other people with other things. There was no sharing or support or creating a network. It was, it makes you very independent. It's like you can do anything yourself, and it created a very strong, DIY or do-it-yourself attitude or mindset, which on the one hand is really good, because it gives you confidence to take things on. It gives you curiosity to understand things. So I'm thankful of that. But what I lacked was the recognizing the benefit of seeking a mentor to help me. I think one of the biggest things I've learned, one of the biggest lessons I'll give to my kids is that you don't have to learn all the lessons yourself. I spent 30 years learning lessons, which a lot of other people have had to learn exactly the same lessons. If I'd spent a little bit of money and learned those lessons from somebody else, I could have fast-tracked my own success. The other ones would be 30 years ago was outsource stuff, Giles, which goes again with that DIY. You don't have to do it all yourself. Focus on what you're really good at, and pay for good advice and good support in those other areas.
Yeah, totally. That's absolutely great advice. So, Giles, the last question I have for you: with all the success that you've built up, property portfolio, you've been doing your developments, renovations, and all of that, how much of it do you think has been of hard work, intelligence, and skill, and how much of it do you think has been of luck?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think there's an element of skill. I think through experience and practice, you can become what you do. So I think skill is ongoing, and I think I've benefited from the skills that I've developed. Intelligence, I wouldn't pipe myself as being intelligent. I'm not academically gifted. I'm going to struggle with my kids' maths homework when he gets to high school. But the skills, definitely. The luck, I think there's a lot of luck. I feel very fortunate, obviously to be where I am today. And obviously I'm lucky that I was born in England as a part to other parts of the world when that happened. I think there's a saying, I think it was Arnold Palmer, the golfer, which was like, the more I practice, the luckier I get. Yeah. And I feel life's like that. So I think that perhaps it's not hard to work, because you can just do the same thing religiously. But the more adventurous you are, more curious you are, the more you experience, the greater opportunity you have to be lucky. And then obviously you have to capitalize on that luck. So yeah, I'd say luck plays a fair part, but you have to make yourself be lucky by putting yourself in positions where that might happen.
Excellent. Well, Giles, it's been a real pleasure to have you on the podcast today to share your story. If listeners want to come and reach out to you and connect with you, what's the best way they can find out and get more information from you?
Yeah, this since I started my brand, I've been doing quite a bit of digital marketing, or have some people doing some digital marketing for me. So I'm across all the social platforms. So you can find me just about anywhere. My business is called Equidity, and obviously, my phone number is available, and my website is eq-property.com.au. So yeah, happy to talk to anyone. Just love talking about property.
Fantastic. Well, Giles, I loved your story. Thank you so much for sharing that story on property investory, and I really, really appreciate the successes that you've achieved, and to be able to share that with our listeners as well. So once again, thank you for coming onto the podcast.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks so much. I really enjoy listening to your podcast. So it's going to be interesting to hear this one.
It's great. Thank you.
All right, thanks. Bye now.